All right, I'm going to go over the lesson practice from lesson 99, and the lesson practice starts on page 626. So if you need to, go to that page right now, hit pause. So at the beginning of this lesson practice, it says that you need to refer to the cube in problems A through E, okay? Now, if you don't have a cube at home to work with, try to pay attention with what I'm using here. I just grabbed this bouillon cube. It's used for cooking. It kind of makes a broth, but it's the only thing I could find that was a true cube. So for letter A, it says, what's the shape of each face? So each face is the whole part here, okay? Okay, so if I look at each face, it's kind of like a side. I see a square. So for letter A, the answer would be a square. That's the shape of each of these faces. Then for letter B, it says is each face parallel to an opposite face? So is this face parallel to, if I flip it over, is it going to be parallel to this one? Well, if you look at it from the side, I see that this side is parallel to this side. So that means this face is parallel to this face. So B would be yes. Letter C, is each edge parallel to at least one other edge? Well, look, I see an edge right here, and I see an edge right here. So this is parallel to this edge, okay? If I turn it, it's also parallel to this one. If you keep turning it, you'll see that it's parallel to each edge as you go around. And same thing, if you flip it on its side, it's still going to be parallel to the opposite edges, okay? So letter C is also yes. Letter D says, is each edge perpendicular to at least one other edge? And yes, D is also yes, because this edge right here, hi Jerry, this edge right here is perpendicular to this edge on the top here. It makes an L, and they cross at a perfect 90-degree angle. If you flip it around too, you'll notice that. You can look at it on the bottom here, flip it, and you'll still see that there are perpendicular lines here. Letter E, what type of angle is formed by every pair of intersecting edges? So wherever these lines intersect, right here, like these perpendicular lines, what angle is this that they meet at? Well, if it's a square, then we know that all angles are right angles. They're making that perfect L shape. Okay, now that's A through E. Okay, if you need to hear a question again, just rewind it a little bit. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to a rectangular prism. All right, I just went and got a cereal box. Okay, this is my favorite cereal, by the way. Tell me what yours is. So this is a rectangular prism. Okay, so if you have a cereal box laying around, you can go grab one to work with to help you answer the questions F through J. We're going to start with letter F. Letter F asks, what's the shape of each face? Well, I see rectangles, okay? There's still 4 sides, so it's and they've all got right angles, so they're all rectangles there. Letter G is each face, okay, parallel to the opposite face. So if I flip this around, is that parallel? Well, just like in the cube it is, because if I turn it sideways, here was that face, and here was that other face, okay? So these in fact are parallel to each other, so G is yes. Now letter H is each edge parallel to at least one other edge. Well, same thing here. Here's an edge, and here's another edge, and they are parallel to each other. They're never going to touch, even if the lines kept going and going. So H is also yes. Letter I, is each edge perpendicular to at least one other edge? Just like in a cube, yes. This edge is perpendicular with this edge. It'll make a perfect 90 degrees. Same with over here on this side. Okay, even if I flip it on its side, you can see that it'll make a perfect 90 degrees. Okay, it's going to cross and make that L. Okay, everywhere. So letter I was also yes. And then last one for this rectangular prism, letter J. What type of angle is formed by every pair of intersecting edges? So every time one of the edges intersects, just like in the cube, you're going to be making right angles. Okay? Everywhere I turn it, everywhere it intersects, those are right angles. Okay? Now the next ones are K through O. And in K through O, you're looking at a triangular prism. Now, I don't have a triangular prism to work with and show you, but I can walk through those with you, and we'll look at the book for that. So in your book at the bottom, it will tell you or have a picture of the triangular prism for you. So letter K says, what are the shapes of the 5 faces? Okay, so if you take a look at that shape, you will see a triangle on both ends. So there's 2 triangles. And then on the edges that form the triangles, it kind of looks like a tent when you look at this triangular prism. Now, on the sides that come down, I see 2 rectangles. But if you were to look at the bottom of that prism, there's also a rectangle. So there's 3 rectangles on this and 2 triangles. Letter L, are the triangular faces parallel? And then they have a second question, are the rectangular faces parallel? Well, the triangular faces are parallel, okay, because there's one on the front and one on the back. So those are right across from each other. They're never going to touch. And then are the rectangular faces parallel? Looking at the picture, they are not, because they are intersecting, okay? They come together at the top, and then if it's also touching on the bottom, that means they're not going to be parallel either. Letter M, are the triangle faces congruent? And then there's a second question again, are the rectangular faces congruent? Well, congruent means it's the same size and the same shape. So in this case, the triangles are congruent and the rectangles are congruent. So in order to create that perfect prism, it's going to be congruent shapes there. Letter N, do you find pairs of edges that are parallel? Do you find ones that are perpendicular? And do you find ones that intersect but are not perpendicular? Okay, so that's 3 questions. I'm going to just start with the first one there. The first says, do you find pairs of edges that are parallel? Yes, you do. Okay, on that bottom, you'll see a rectangle just laying flat on the ground. So if I imagine this was just a flat rectangle on the ground like this, the edges are definitely parallel to each other, okay? Because you could have this edge parallel to this edge, or this right side parallel to the left side over here, okay? The second question asks if there are edges that are perpendicular. So yes, because also on the bottom here, that bottom rectangle, you will have edges that go across and ones that go down. And because it's a rectangle, they are going to meet at a perfect L, and they are going to be perpendicular. And then the last question for letter N asks if there are edges that intersect but aren't perpendicular. So yes, again, so when you have this triangular prism, you have this rectangle. But then you have a triangle coming up. So if an edge, like my arm, meets this rectangle, okay, it is not perpendicular. It's not making a perfect 90 degrees, but it's still intersecting. It's still touching it. So yes, that question is also a yes. And then last one for the triangular prism, letter O. What types of angles are formed by the intersecting edges? Well, again, if you look at that bottom rectangle, you're going to see right angles. Same with the rectangles that are slanted like this. Okay, you're going to have right angles all the way throughout that. But then when you have the triangles, if you take a look at that kind of triangle, they're all smaller than a right angle, so that means they're all acute angles. Okay, and then one last part of our lesson practice. Now this part of this lesson practice is also a triangular prism, but the triangular prism looks different because you have a different kind of triangle in it. This triangle, in this example, is a right triangle, and you can tell that because right here in the corner they have that little box, and that tells you that it's a right angle here. So let's go ahead and look at those couple problems, P through T. Letter P says, what are the shapes of the 5 faces here? Just like before, you're going to have a triangle in the front, triangle in the back, and then everything else is created with the rectangles again. So you're going to have the same thing as before, 2 right angles, or 2 right triangles, and 3 rectangles. Letter Q, which faces are parallel? Just like before, the triangular faces, so the triangles, those right triangles, are parallel to each other because you've got a right triangle in the front and a right triangle in the back. So they're complete opposite of each other. They're never going to touch. Letter R. Are the triangular faces congruent? Are the rectangular faces congruent? The triangles are congruent, okay? You've got the same size and the same shape of triangles. But the rectangles are not congruent because if you look at the triangle that is slanted, it's kind of long, like this cereal box. But if you look at the rectangle on the bottom, so the base, it looks more like a square. So those are not the same shape or size, so they are not congruent. Letter S, are there pairs of edges that are parallel, perpendicular, intersecting, but not perpendicular? So this is a 3-part question, kind of like back up on letter N. So the first question was, are there edges that are parallel? Yes, there are going to be edges that are parallel, especially if we have shapes that are rectangles, because rectangles have parallel sides, okay? Even if you flip it, they're parallel, okay? Are there perpendicular sides or edges? Yes, there are perpendicular edges if you're dealing with rectangles, okay? Going across and going down. You meet at a perfect L or a perfect right angle. That is perpendicular. And then the last part of letter S is, are there intersecting lines or intersecting edges that are not perpendicular? Yes. Again, like in letter N, because you have a triangle coming down at an angle, when it meets with a rectangle down here, you have an angle. So it's hitting it at a smaller angle than a right angle. Remember, it has to be a perfect right angle for it to be perpendicular. So if it comes down and it's not perpendicular, but it still touches it, that's still called intersecting because they're still touching. So in letter S, all 3 of those questions are yes, just like on letter N. Then one last question, letter T. What types of angles are formed by the intersecting edges? So every time the edges intersect, so in all of the rectangles, you are going to have right angles. Everything always meets at a right angle. Now with the triangle. The triangle, remember, is a right angle. So you are going to have one right angle here, okay? But these angles right up here in this corner on the top and then on the left right here, those are smaller than right angles, so those are going to be acute. So for letter T, you're going to have both right angles and acute angles.